You are tired in a way that is not physical. It's not the exhaustion of someone who worked too much or slept too little. It's a deeper kind of exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has been fighting long enough to know that the fight isn't producing what it should. That they are putting energy into a process that isn't responding the way it should, given how much is being invested. That they are forcing, controlling, monitoring, adjusting, trying from different angles, and yet the movement they were expecting isn't happening with the proportion or timing that seemed reasonable to expect. And you didn't give up. That's important to say because it's what makes this exhaustion different from all the others. It's not giving up. It's not a lack of will. It's not a lack of commitment or faith or anything else that could justify the absence of results. It's the specific exhaustion of someone who persevered when it was difficult, who didn't stop when they had sufficient reasons to stop, who did the work seriously and who is still here, exhausted, without understanding why the process that should be moving forward remains stalled. And the question that lies within this weariness, the one you can't stop asking even when you're too exhausted to want to ask questions, is always the same. What else do I need to do? And the answer this video will give you might seem wrong at first. It will seem too simplistic. It will seem like it can't be the real answer to something that's costing so much. But it's the answer that changes everything when you finally understand it from the inside and not just as a concept. Nothing. What you need to do is nothing different from what you're doing. What you need to stop doing is fighting with what you're doing while you're doing it. Stay until the end. Because what you're about to understand here will completely reorganize your relationship with the process you're trying to go through. There is a distinction that most people have never learned to make, and it is one of the most important distinctions that exist within any real transformation process. The distinction between persistence and struggle. On the outside, they may seem the same. Both involve persevering when it's difficult. Both involve not stopping when there are reasons to stop. Both involve a commitment that persists even when the outcome doesn't confirm that it's worth persisting. If you were observing someone from the outside without having access to what's happening inside, it would be difficult to tell which of the two is present. But internally, they are completely different states, with completely different qualities, with completely different frequencies. And the surrounding field responds to both in ways that are not only different but opposite. Persistence has a quality of presence, of alignment with the process, of confidence that doesn't need the process to move the way you expect it to keep moving. It acts, dedicates itself, commits, continues. But within a state that accepts what is while moving towards what is coming, that is not in conflict with the timing. That is not resisting the way things are taking shape. That is not constantly monitoring whether the process is happening the right way at the right speed. She is simply present with what is while continuing to do what needs to be done. The struggle has a different quality that you recognize when you stop to feel where your actions are coming from. There's an underlying tension, a resistance to what is being experienced that coexists with the act of continuing. A part that is constantly evaluating whether the process is happening the way it should. And that becomes tense when the evaluation reveals that it isn't, an urgency that things should be different than they are. More advanced, faster, more in the way you expected when you started. The struggle continues. But it continues in conflict with the process rather than in alignment with it. And here's what's most important to understand about the difference between the two. The surrounding field doesn't respond to what you're doing. It responds to the frequency of where you're doing it. And persistence and struggle, although they produce the same actions outwardly, produce completely different frequencies inwardly. Persistence emits a frequency of alignment, of confidence, of presence with what is. Struggle emits a frequency of resistance, of conflict with what is, of disagreement with the timing and form of the process. And the field that mirrors what you emit will organize completely different realities in response to the two. To understand exactly what the struggle is communicating to the field, you need to understand how communication with the field actually works. The field doesn't read your conscious intentions. It doesn't read what you want. It doesn't read what you're trying to create, attract, or manifest. It reads the frequency you are consistently emitting from your deepest state. And the struggle, regardless of the conscious intentions that accompany it, emits a very specific message that is exactly the opposite of what you want to communicate. When you're struggling with the timing of the process, when you're at odds with the fact that things aren't moving as fast as they should, when you're frustrated with the way things are going because it's not the way you expected, you're communicating to the field a belief that's operating beneath it all. The belief that what is not right, that the process is wrong, that the timing is wrong, that the form is wrong, that you know better than the process how and when things should happen to be correct. And the field doesn't evaluate whether that belief is justified or not. It doesn't judge whether your preferred timing is better than the timing that's happening. It simply mirrors the frequency it's receiving. And the frequency it's receiving is the frequency that what's happening is wrong. And when the field mirrors that frequency, what it organizes around you is a reality that confirms that what's happening is wrong. More delays, more resistance, more situations that confirm the process isn't moving the way it should. More evidence that something is blocked in a way that needs to be unblocked before things can move forward. Not because the field is punitive, not because I'm testing you cruelly, but because it's a mirror, and a mirror doesn't choose what it reflects. It reflects exactly what's in front of it with a precision that can't be manipulated. And the struggle, however understandable it may be given what you're going through, is constantly reminding you that what you are is not right. And the mirror reflects back exactly that. Think of it this way. Imagine you're trying to sleep but struggling with the fact that you can't. You're tense because of the insomnia, constantly monitoring whether you're getting any closer to sleep, frustrated with every passing minute without falling asleep, calculating how many hours you still have if you manage to fall asleep now. And this struggle with insomnia is precisely what maintains the insomnia. Not because you are weak or because you are doing something wrong, but because the state of fighting the absence of sleep is incompatible with the state of sleep. Sleep requires a quality of surrender, of letting go of control, of allowing what is to come without forcing its arrival. And the struggle creates exactly the opposite of that state. The process you are going through works in the same way. It requires a quality of presence and alignment that is incompatible with the frequency of struggle. And as long as struggle is present as the dominant state, the process will continue to encounter resistance not because it is blocked by some external force, but because the frequency being emitted is creating the friction that is preventing movement. And this is where most people get stuck in a cycle that can last for months or years. You realize the fight isn't working. You look at the effort you're putting in and the results you're getting, and the disproportion is too great to ignore. So you do what seems logical to do. He decides to stop fighting, but you decide to stop fighting as a strategy, as a new approach to produce the result that fighting didn't produce. You heard that letting go makes the field move. You understood that tension creates friction. So you decide to remove the tension to see if the friction decreases. And here's the problem. You are using control to try to stop controlling. Think of it this way. Imagine you're having trouble sleeping, and someone tells you that forcing yourself to sleep is what's preventing you from falling asleep. So you decide to stop forcing it, but you stay in bed monitoring whether you're managing not to force it, checking if the new approach is working, assessing if sleep is coming now that you've stopped trying to force it. That's still forcing it. It's just become more sophisticated. Strategic surrender works exactly like this. On the outside, it seems like letting go. On the inside, there's still the same monitoring as before, the same need for results. The same tension of wanting things to be different than they are. Only now it's covered by a layer of detached language that hasn't changed what's underneath. And the field doesn't read the surface. It reads what's underneath. Genuine surrender is different in a way that you can feel when it actually happens. It's not a decision you make. It's a place you arrive at, a place where resistance to what's happening has been genuinely released. Not because you decided to release it, but because you've processed enough, understood enough, gone through enough, that letting go happens naturally instead of being deliberately practiced. And when it truly happens, you know, not because the field immediately responds with visible results, but because the monitoring stops. The internal noise diminishes. The tension that was always present in the background of everything becomes less without you trying to reduce it. And then, without you even looking for it, things start to appear. But here's the part that needs to be said clearly, because this is where the confusion arises that keeps more people trapped for longer than anything else in this process. To stop fighting is not to give up. These two things seem the same. They use similar words. They produce similar sensations when you think about them. And because of this, most people never genuinely manage to stop fighting because the moment they start to let go of the fight, the internal system triggers an alarm that says this is giving up, and the alarm is convincing enough to pull them back into the tension they were trying to release. And this alarm is not irrational. It was installed by an entire culture that equates struggling with truly wanting something and letting go with not wanting it enough. Think about how you were raised in relation to this topic. From childhood, the stories most celebrated around you were those of people who didn't give up, who persevered when it was difficult, who persisted when everyone around them was telling them to stop, who fought against circumstances until those circumstances yielded. These stories were told as models of how people who truly want something behave, and they created a very deep association between continuing to fight and having character, between letting go and being weak, between stopping forcing and not deserving what you want. And this association isn't entirely wrong in all contexts. In a test, in a physical competition, in a situation that demands repeated effort to develop skill, the persistence that continues even when it is difficult is genuinely what produces results. The musician who continues practicing when the music doesn't sound right is doing the right thing. The athlete who continues training when their body is tired is doing the right thing. In this type of process, effort is proportional to the result, and the struggle has a real purpose. But a frequency transformation process doesn't work like a test or a physical workout. And applying the logic of proportional effort to a process that operates according to completely different laws is what creates the friction that is hindering movement. So let's separate the two things with a clarity that your inner alarm won't be able to use against you. Giving up is a very specific thing. It's withdrawing the intention. It's reaching the point of saying, on some level, whether aloud or just silently within yourself, I don't want this anymore. It's letting go of the destiny. It's letting go of the commitment to what you're creating. It's a real change in the direction you're moving, not just the way you're moving. Giving up has a very recognizable quality when it truly happens. It has a kind of relief mixed with sadness. A feeling that a weight has been placed on the ground, not because you are resting to continue carrying it, but because you have decided that you will no longer carry it. A resignation that doesn't have the quality of peace, but does have the quality of ending. Giving up the fight is completely different in each of these aspects. When you truly stop fighting, the intention doesn't change. The destination doesn't change. The commitment doesn't change. What you're creating doesn't change. The direction you're moving in doesn't change. None of these things are touched by the process of ceasing to fight. What changes is the internal quality of where you move toward what you want. Instead of moving with the tension that things should be different than they are, You move with the presence of someone who accepts where they are while continuing to go where they want to be. Instead of acting with the urgency of someone who needs the result to appear now to confirm they are on the right track, you act with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are on the right track, regardless of when the result will appear. Instead of fighting the rhythm of the process, you continue moving within the rhythm that the process is having without demanding that the rhythm be different. The intention remains. The destination remains. The commitment remains. What goes away is the friction between where you are and where you want to be. The conflict between the timing you would prefer and the timing that is happening. The constant resistance to what was consuming enormous energy without producing any real movement. Think about what it's like to walk against a very strong wind. You keep walking. The direction doesn't change. The destination doesn't change. The commitment to getting there doesn't change. But each step costs a disproportionate effort. You need to lean forward, tense your entire body. Use muscles that shouldn't be involved in the simple act of walking just to maintain the movement. And you arrive slower, much more tired than you should be, spending much more than necessary to cover a distance that under normal conditions would cost a fraction of that. The struggle with the process is like that wind. You keep moving. The destination is the same. But the friction that the struggle creates makes each step cost much more than it should. And the tiredness you're feeling, the kind that isn't physical, that doesn't respond to rest the way physical tiredness would, is the accumulated cost of walking against a wind that you yourself are creating. To stop fighting is to stop creating the wind. It's not to stop walking. And when the wind stops, something happens that seems simple but has an effect you only fully understand when you experience it. The same step that once required disproportionate effort becomes light, not because you've become stronger, not because the path has become easier, but because the friction that was multiplying the cost of each step is gone. And the movement that seemed impossible given how much force was needed to produce it becomes natural. Not because external circumstances have changed, because the internal resistance that was creating the difficulty has been genuinely released. Also consider a tap that is stuck. You try to open it. It doesn't open. You force it harder. It still doesn't open. You call someone else to help. The two of you force it together. It still doesn't open. And the force being applied is creating tension that is causing the tap to jam even more, not less, because the tension is distorting the mechanism that needs to rotate freely to function. And then someone who understands how faucets work arrives, looks at the situation, and with a smooth, completely forceless turn, the faucet opens. Not because the smooth rotation was stronger than all the force that had been applied before, but because it was the right kind of movement for that specific mechanism. The force was creating the problem it was trying to solve. And when the force was removed, the mechanism functioned in the way it had always been able to function. The process you're trying to go through is this faucet. You don't need more force. You need the right kind of presence. And the right kind of presence is incompatible with fighting. Not because fighting is wrong as a character trait, but because the specific mechanism you're trying to move doesn't respond to force the same way it responds to alignment. And when you genuinely stop fighting, when resistance to what is truly released and not just superficially, something that seemed paradoxical becomes completely obvious. The process you are trying to force to move begins to move on its own. Not all at once, not dramatically in most cases, in ways that at first seem too small to be what they are. An opening in a place that was closed. A conversation that flows in a way that conversations of this type were not flowing. An idea that arrives with a clarity that was not there before. A direction that suddenly seems obvious where before there was confusion. And you realize, with a mixture of relief and slight disbelief, that the process wasn't blocked by something external that needed to be forced open. It was blocked by the tension that the struggle itself was creating, And when the tension was gone, whatever had been trying to move all along finally had the space to do so. So what actually happens when the fighting truly stops? Not all at once. Not dramatically. In a way that has a specific quality that you recognize when you're in it because it's completely different from any state that fighting produced. The first thing that changes is the quality of inner silence. When you're struggling, there's a constant noise beneath it all. An internal dialogue that's always evaluating, monitoring, calculating, worrying. It's always somewhere between the present and the future that should have arrived but hasn't yet. It's always carrying the weight of everything that hasn't happened the way you expected. When the struggle truly ends, this noise diminishes, not all at once, in layers. Like when the wind that's been blowing all night finally stops and you realize there was a constant noise that had been there for so long that it had become the background noise you no longer noticed. And when it stops, you realize there was something there all along that was costing you energy, in a way you were no longer consciously registering. And in the silence that follows when the noise of the fight fades, something begins to emerge that was there all along but was impossible to hear with the noise of the fight covering it. A direction that doesn't come from urgency. A clarity that doesn't need argument to support itself. A next step that's simply there when you stop searching and start listening. The second thing that changes is the quality of the actions. When you're fighting, the actions come from a place of tension, from a need to produce results that confirm the effort is worthwhile, from the anxiety that if you don't act now, something will be lost or delayed even further. And this quality of tension is perceptible to the field and to the people around you in a way that you can't hide, no matter how hard you try. When the struggle for action comes from a different place, quieter, more aligned, with the quality of someone who is doing what needs to be done because it is what needs to be done, not because they are desperate to produce a specific result at a specific time. And this different quality produces different interactions, different opportunities, different responses from the surrounding field, not because you did something different externally, because the state from which the action comes is different. And the state from which the action comes is what the surrounding field is reading more attentively than any specific action you can take. And the third thing that changes, which is the most visible and the most confusing because it comes from a direction that wasn't being monitored, is that things start appearing from where you weren't looking. When you're struggling, all your attention is directed to where movement isn't happening, to what's blocked, to what isn't responding the way it should. And this concentration of attention on what isn't moving creates a blindness to what is moving in other directions. When the struggle stops and attention is freed from that fixation, you begin to perceive movements that were happening but were invisible because they weren't where you were looking. A connection that forms naturally without effort. An opportunity that appears in a context that wasn't in your plan. An idea that arrives with a clarity that isn't forced. An event that happens that reorganizes something that seemed stuck in a way that no direct effort had achieved. These movements are not a coincidence. They are the field responding to a different frequency, organizing what can be organized now that the friction of the struggle is no longer preventing organization. And now comes the more practical part, how to truly stop fighting and not just for show. The first thing is to recognize when you are struggling before trying to change the situation. This seems obvious, but it isn't, because the struggle is so familiar, so naturalized as part of the process that it's often not perceived as a struggle. It seems like commitment. It seems like seriousness. It seems like the correct way to relate to something that matters. And only when you learn to recognize the specific texture of the struggle in the body, the tension it creates in the chest or shoulders, the quality of friction it has when it's present, can you begin to work with it. So when you realize you're struggling, pause. Not to stop fighting immediately through willpower, just to acknowledge it. This is struggle. This tension I'm feeling is the friction of being in conflict with what is. And non-judgmental acknowledgement is always the first step toward any real change. The second thing is to ask a question that seems simple but has a profound effect when asked honestly. What would be different in my life now if I fully accepted that the process is moving in the right time and way, even if it doesn't seem right to me now? Not accepting because you agree the timing is ideal. Not accepting because you have evidence that the form is right. Accepting as a deliberate act of releasing resistance to what is, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. And after asking the question, simply observe what changes in your internal state. Often, the simple question creates a small space, a millimeter of distance between you and the resistance, which is enough to feel the difference between the state of struggle and the state of acceptance. And this difference, felt in the body and not just understood intellectually, is what makes genuine acceptance possible. The third thing, and the most powerful, is to identify what specifically you are resisting and to name precisely what would be necessary to genuinely accept it. Because the struggle is rarely with the process as a whole. It's with something specific, the timing of something specific, the form that something specific is taking, the absence of something specific that should be present. And when you can precisely name what is resisting, it becomes much more possible to genuinely work with that specific resistance instead of trying to change the overall state, without addressing what is specifically creating the friction. Sometimes what you discover when you name the resistance is that there's something legitimate that needs attention. A real concern that deserves to be processed rather than suppressed. A genuine fear that needs to be acknowledged before it can be integrated. And carefully processing what is legitimate is completely different from fighting the process. Processing resolves. Fighting perpetuates. You've made it this far, and the tiredness you were feeling before you started watching this video probably has a different name now. It's not the exhaustion of someone doing something wrong. It's the exhaustion of someone doing the right thing in the most difficult way. It's the exhaustion of fighting a process that doesn't need fighting. That isn't asking for more effort. That isn't expecting you to push harder, control more, monitor more. It's waiting for you to let go. Not destiny. Not intention. Not commitment to what you want to create. It's waiting for you to release the friction between what you want and what is. Between where you want to be and where you are. Between the timing you would prefer and the timing that is happening. This letting go is not weakness. It is the bravest act you can take within a real process of transformation, because it is much easier to keep fighting than to genuinely trust. It is much easier to force than to let go. It is much more familiar to carry the tension of control than to inhabit the lightness of alignment. And when you truly let go, not as a strategy but as a genuine result of having reached a place of peace with what is, the field will begin to move in ways that effort never could produce. Not because you finally did the right thing, but because you finally stopped doing the thing that was preventing you from achieving what you were already trying to achieve. Leave a comment describing what you're struggling with in the process right now. The timing. The form. The absence of what hasn't yet arrived. One word, one phrase. Because naming the struggle is the first step in ceasing to be governed by it without realizing it. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Because what's being built here recognizes from within what you're experiencing instead of explaining it from the outside. And each video will arrive at the moment you need exactly what it has to say. And if you want to understand what happens after the fight stops, when the field starts moving in ways you weren't expecting and from directions you weren't monitoring, and how not to go back to the fight when the first things start to appear, the next video will show you exactly that. Because stopping the fight is one thing. Maintaining a state of alignment when the field begins to respond without letting the urgency to capture what has arrived create a new fight is something entirely different.